Thank you very much for joining us here today. I'm Marla Crockett, the chair of the board of NCDD, sitting in for Sandy Heyerbacher this afternoon. She has to be on another call dealing with the mental health initiative, but hope she can join us about halfway through the hour. And this is a webinar to learn more about the Harwood Institute and its work. Our goal for the next 60 minutes is to help you get more familiar with and explore the potential for using the Harwood approach to community change. We should have about 145 people on the line, at least that is if everyone who registered joins us. And so it's going to be a big group, and we want to try to get as many of your questions in as possible. And we'll tell you how to do that in just a moment. But first I want to introduce Mike Wood. He's going to be our guide today. He's back with Rich Harwood after working at United Way Worldwide for 7 years to help local agencies connect more authentically with their communities. Mike heads up the Harwood Institute's Business Development and Strategic Partnerships area. NCDD is exploring a relationship with Harwood to help them collaborate more effectively with you, our members, in the different locations in which they work. So we'll keep you posted on that development. I've followed Rich Harwood and his work for about 18 of the 25 years he's been in business, first as a journalist in public broadcasting and now as an independent consultant. I've admired and used the Harwood Institute's research on Americans' attitudes about participating in public life, something all of us should really have in the back of our minds as we do our own engagement work. And I've seen the Institute innovate a whole lot over the years and come to the conclusion that aspirations are at the heart of all meaningful change. We'll get to that in just a moment, and there is a lot more, a variety of frameworks that Mike is going to go through. So, Mike, welcome. Mike, are you there? Hello? Okay, so can anybody hear me? I seem to have lost Mike Wood. Hello? Okay. Mike, are you there?
Can everyone hear me?
There we go. Hi, Mike. Welcome.
Hello. I apologize. We had a little bit of a technical glitch, also known as I forgot to click a button. So,
well, I hope everybody heard me, and I'm glad they can all hear you now.
So sorry about that, but thanks to everyone for joining us today. I really appreciate it. As Marla mentioned, we're very interested in connecting more with NCDD members, and I think, frankly, there's a lot that we can learn from you, and I hope that there's some things that we can share with you that that will be helpful in the work that you're doing as well. If you all have questions along the way, put those in the chat box, and we'll try to address those as we move along. What I would like to do is try to keep this as conversational as we can, as conversational as you can make a webinar, and we'll try to answer questions as we go along, and I suspect that Marla will have some questions as well as we go through this, and so we'll try to make this as conversational. What I really hope that we could do today is give you all a chance to learn a little bit more about what the Institute's doing, and just a little bit about our approach, the work that we do in communities, and how we tackle that, and how that work specifically connects to a lot of the work that I know many of you are doing to try to improve the way that your institutions engage with communities, whether those are government institutions or other nonprofits or businesses and so forth. And so I want to make sure that we make those connections as explicit as we can. I want to give you a few examples of the work we've done, and then I really want to round it out with ways that you can join us. And so there are easy things that you can do to stay connected with us. We also have some opportunities through some trainings that are coming up where we're going to offer discounts to NCDD members. So those there may be some things there that you're interested in, and so we hope that we can bring you into our work more deeply, and hopefully we can connect with one another and partner in ways that'll be mutually beneficial. So does that sound good to everyone?
Sounds great, Mike.
Great. So if there's any, again, if you have any questions or there's other things you want to learn about, just type into the chat box, and we'll try to attach those to the conversation as well. So just be thinking about that as we're going through this. So just to give you a little bit of background on the Institute, some of you probably have heard about the Harwood Institute. I think Rich Harwood did a call with NCDD members not too long ago. We've actually been around for about 25 years. Rich Harwood started the Institute in the late 1980s because he was really just not happy with the way that things were going in politics and public life. He wasn't happy with the way that many nonprofits, some of which he had worked with, frankly, were approaching some of the ways they connected with communities. He wasn't happy with the way politics was being conducted. He worked on a number of campaigns, and he thought that there was an appetite in this country and a market for organizations and people that wanted to work in a fundamentally different way and be an antidote to some of what he was seeing in the country. And so he started the Institute. At that time, actually, it was called the Harwood Group, and it was started as a for-profit and was pretty successful at that for a number of years. And through that work, actually was approached by a number of foundations and other funders that said, you know, we'd really like to invest in your work on a larger scale, but we kind of are looking for other nonprofit partners. And so that sort of spurred the idea of shifting to a nonprofit model, which he did. And so here we are. And we've worked in communities all across the country. And much of our work is actually being adopted by a number of organizations in small ways around the world in roughly 40 countries. So, so the work's been spreading for a while. But what is the work? So at a basic level, we're interested in getting politics and public life back on track. Like many of you are, I'm sure. Politics is clearly dysfunctional at multiple levels. We've all seen that certainly with the government shutdown, but for those of us that are involved in this work, we know that this has been a trend for years and years. So that's something that we want to try to remedy. We know there's no one organization that can do that, but we want to be part of the solution. We also know that that's had a corrosive effect on the way people engage in politics and public life. And so our work has revealed over the years, and I know many of you have seen this as well, that people in many ways, and there are exceptions to this, but in many ways the average person has sort of just walked away from politics and public life. And they've done that because, frankly, when they look at institutions and they look at leaders, they say, you know, these people aren't really reflecting the reality of the things that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. The way they talk, the things they're talking about, the issues they're dealing with, the fights they're having, they just don't reflect what I'm dealing with. And so there's been an increasing disconnect. Institutions aren't seen as being trusted, especially large institutions. That's happening more and more, and that's not just with government, but that's large nonprofits too. As Marla mentioned, I worked for United Way Worldwide for 7 years, and I know that that was something that we dealt with, that our trust numbers, public trust numbers, continue to decline. Other large nonprofits and even some smaller ones were suffering from that as well. And so there's a sense that institutions are disconnected from communities and they're not effective, even though I can tell you that I work with a lot of people who came to work every day wanting to try to improve communities. But we know that, that there's a disconnect there. And so we're really interested in helping organizations and people figure out how they can be more effectively connected to communities so that they can engage their communities in a more authentic way, so that they can do their work in a way that actually helps them produce long-term sustainable change and allows them to achieve their mission in a way that actually builds the community itself so that the communities are becoming stronger. And we'll talk about this more in a minute, but clearly engaging, listening to communities, connecting with communities, helping people be more of a participant in community work, those are foundational to being more effective in your work. We think that there's more to it than that, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but that's a foundational piece to our work. And I think for many of you that are helping to work with organizations to try to help them engage their communities more effectively, you'll see a lot of things in our work that resonate with you. So that's sort of what we're trying to do at a high level. And how do we do that? You'll hear us talk at the Institute a lot about turning outward. And again, I'm going to go into this a little bit more in a minute. But what we mean at a high level is that when we say we're trying to get people to be turned outward and to turn outward in their work, we're trying to work with people so that they're actually using the community as a reference point, not just for the big decisions that they have to make in their work, but also for the day-to-day decisions. And I think if you ask most people that do community work, regardless of what sector they come from, they would say, oh yeah, we use the community as a reference point. You know, we care about the community. The community is important to us. You know, we go and get their input, or we do our public opinion polls, or we do our surveys, or we always go out and do public feedback sessions before we take action. We care about what the community thinks in our work. But frankly, our experience is that our engagement with communities is pretty thin, and we're not actually connecting with communities in a way that that builds the kind of partnership that you need to sustain change over time. And we're not as deliberate as we could be about how we're actually building the ingredients that make communities work as we're actually going about our work in communities.
And Mike, Harwood has also produced a paper, I think, called, what, The Organization First. So many community organizations, while they think they're turned outward, are really focused more on their own internal priorities. Is that basically what this is about?
That's right. And I didn't even have to pay you for that. So great plug for our for the Organization First Approach report. We have a number of reports, but the one that Marla's talking about is a report that we did for the Kettering Foundation a number of years ago called the Organization First Approach. And we went out and interviewed a number of organizations that are working in communities. And what we found is that that frankly, at times when it was really important for organizations to be externally focused, engaged in their communities in deeper ways, they became much more inwardly focused. And what we mean by that is we had organizations that were about changing communities, focusing instead on how do we increase our bottom line, how do we build our branding, how do we get a competitive advantage. In other words, they were using the conference room as their reference point and not the community. Now, we're not naive about this work. We need to raise money. Everyone needs to raise money. We need to be positioned. We need the right branding. But our experience is that, and this is counterintuitive for people, frankly, is that if you're externally focused and you're using the community as the reference point for your decisions, it actually enhances your ability to improve those internal markers that are so important for our organizations, to raise more money, to strengthen our brand, to strengthen our position in the work. And so, you know, we always like to say that to change effectively internally, you have to focus externally. And I'll give you some examples of how we've done that in communities here in a minute. And clearly one of them is working with United Ways, but there's a few others that I want to talk about that I think will be interesting to you all. And if that's a report that you all are interested in, we can make sure that you get a copy of that. So turning outward, it it matters, and I think most of you, because you do this work every day, you'll hear this, and it intuitively matters to you because you're fighting the good fight every day to get organizations more engaged and better connected to communities, and to bring people more into processes they frankly should be involved in meaningful ways. But it's not always intuitive for people, and so the reality, though, is that through the work that we've done, we've seen this time and time again, that if you are turned outward in the way that you do your work, you're much more better positioned to create the kind of impact that you want to create, to generate the resources. Again, we know that's important, and you're actually better equipped to deliver efforts in communities with partners that will sustain change. And that's really important, too, because so much of the change that we see is sort of episodic and it's short-term. And our experience, again, is that a lot of times those efforts are undertaken without sort of looking at the ingredients that make communities work and how we can build those at the same time. So I wanted to, let me just take a minute to sort of dig into turning outward just a little bit. There's really, I think this is important, so because I've seen this time and time again. So turning outward can oftentimes be sort of boiled down to you go out and you need to engage the community and you need to listen to the community. So if you're a nonprofit, and I saw this certainly working with United Ways, but we've seen it with other partners too. So we went out and did some community listening. So we're turning outward. In one sense, that's true. So turning outward is an action. So to turn outward is to better understand the community. It's to listen deeply to the community. It's to engage the community. But there's a difference, and we've seen this in our work, from the act of turning outward and actually being turned outward. Or, you know, frankly, as I like to say, it's hard to change. And so what we mean is that when you're actually turned outward, you're actually approaching your work in a fundamentally different way. You're actually behaving in a different way. You're making different choices. Again, I mentioned this before, both strategic and day-to-day choices. So what we're really interested in is, you know, we provide tools and support and training to help people take the action of turning outward, to go out and listen to the community, to build what we call public knowledge, to theme that knowledge, to think about how to use that knowledge. But we want to give you a set of tools and frameworks and coach you and work with people over time to actually help them be turned outward in the work that they're doing. And the way I think about that, you'll see the little picture of the guy looking at the exercise bike that's a coat rack. I think about this a lot like you would think about the fact that you might need to go on a diet, or so. You know, this is actually my life we're talking about. So, so I, you know, my brother is he's really a fitness guru, and one of the things he's told me is that diets never work. That you really have to commit to a lifestyle change. You just have to say, I'm changing my lifestyle. That if you think about it as a diet, you'll do it for a while, and then you'll stop, and then you'll go back to the way things were, business as usual. And I think this work is a lot like that. So if you are inwardly focused in your approach, and that's your orientation, you can go out and do listening, but you're going to fall back into your old habits. And so, like someone who needs to change their lifestyle, the first step is actually saying, I need to have a lifestyle change. You can go, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll say that, and then you'll go and get a coach or a trainer, and you'll sign up for the gym. And, you know, the trainer will take you around, and they'll show you the tools, you know, like the exercise bike, the elliptical, the bands, all that stuff. You can tell I go to the gym a lot. And they'll show you how to use those things, and then they'll work with you over time so that you start to build a habit of using those tools. but it becomes part of your lifestyle. So fitness, eating healthy, et cetera, become a part of your lifestyle. And so the key for people is that they actually develop a lifestyle that's different than the one they developed before. They're making decisions different on a daily basis, and so that's really a lot of how our work is deployed in communities. And so when we work with people and organizations, we have tools and frameworks, and then we apply teaching and coaching so that you can take those tools, but you can actually start to apply them to your decision making, and you can start to develop a different habit and different behavior. So we want to move you from the act of turning outward to actually being turned outward in the way that you approach your work. And so think about it as sort of moving from just practicing some behaviors, but to actually having a different orientation and a different approach to the way that you do your work. And I like the coat rack idea because change is really hard, and the reason we don't just teach you tools and frameworks and give you tools, but we actually work with you over time is because we've learned that that just providing the tools is not enough. So just taking someone to the gym, showing them the exercise equipment, that's not enough. A lot of times you do that, and or you buy an exercise bike, and then it just turns into a coat rack or just turns into a clothes rack. So I've seen that with the Harwood tools when they're not coupled with sort of that practice on a daily basis and how you use those things in your strategic and your day-to-day decision making.
Mike, what frameworks do you think our members could get the most benefit from?
Sure. So.
And by the way, if you have questions, don't forget that we've got a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we just want to integrate as many questions as possible here, so keep that in mind. And so what do we have here, Mike?
Yeah, so and also we'll make sure that that you all get copies of these afterwards. I'm not going to go through every little detail, but I wanted you to have some of these as a resource. We do have a number of frameworks and concepts that we deploy and we try to teach that help you make those shifts in the way you work. And so I mentioned before that anytime we're working with organizations or individuals, we always start with the act of turning outward, with the act of engaging the community, and we provide tools that help organizations and people do listening in the community in a fundamentally different way. And so we really focus, for example, a lot of organizations will listen in the community and they'll always start with tell us what the problems are and tell us what we need to do to fix them. Our experience is that that has to be shifted because it reinforces a relationship that the person in the community is the customer and the organization is the customer service provider. And I know, like many of you, that we want to shift that relationship so that there's a partnership. And so we tend to start with aspirations. And we found in our work that some people think that's soft, but our experience is that it's really profound in terms of the way it helps people shift their thinking. And so it's not about empty visioning, but what do people really want to see in their community? And so we provide tools that help people turn outward. And you know, many of you won't be surprised, but some of you may be, that we've worked with a number of organizations that are community-based, and when we ask them to go out and just do some listening with everyday people in the community, they don't want to do it. They can come up with a million reasons why they don't need to do it, because they already know what's important. They have the data, they have the research, they have the best practices. But what we'll say is, but you don't have the relationships in the community, and you actually don't have a good understanding of how people name and frame problems for themselves in the words that they use. And so the other thing is that we found that when you shift from finger pointing and focusing on problems, that you actually get to shared possibilities for how you can work together, and that's really important because frankly, part of a real value of actually turning outward and engaging is that just the simple act of it can start to shift that relationship. And so, that's key. So I just want to make that explicit connection because I know many of you are in that space. That we think that's really critical, and frankly, most of the organizations that we know that are out there that are working on community efforts don't have the tools or the skills or sometimes the inclination to engage in that way on an ongoing basis in a way that's meaningful and with, not just with leaders but with all layers of the community. So that's really foundational to our work. I mentioned that we'd like to focus on aspirations. We found that helps to shift the relationship. Our work, our frameworks and our concepts really fall into a few key areas. So we have those foundational concepts, like I just mentioned. We also have frameworks that are around building community knowledge. So we give you tools to listen, but we also have tools and frameworks that help you pull out knowledge from those conversations, from that engagement. We also have tools like community rhythms, which is the 5 stages of community life. And so one of the things that we've learned is that communities go through stages, and a lot of times organizations want to pull a best practice from one community and plop it into another, but then it doesn't work in that community. Because what we found is that depending on your stage of community life, your community may or may not be ready to work on a large comprehensive effort. And depending on where your community is, you may want to calibrate your effort. And so part of listening is about building the public knowledge that helps you identify those stages and then calibrate your strategies so that your strategies are actually going to be effective. We teach about public capital, so I mentioned the ingredients that make communities work. So there are 9 factors of public capital. What are those factors, and how do you actually build them? How do you actually execute your work in a way that is actually building those ingredients at the same time? Again, the listening you do in communities can help you get a much better understanding of the stage and the public capital. And then we work with you on executing strategies in a way that are actually connected to the community and build those ingredients at the same time. And we call, just sort of moving from left to right on this chart, we call that the sweet spot. So how do you execute strategies and achieve your mission in a way that builds community at the same time? So we have frameworks for that. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but we also work with you on internal culture. So again, we focus on turning externally to then drive internal change. And so if you've been out there listening to community, building public knowledge, aligning your strategies to the context of the community in a way that's going to build community, how do you start to build the culture inside your organization so that learning from the community and thinking about the implications for your work but how do you build learning into your organization so that you're actually creating the right spaces where innovation can happen? I'll just make sort of one big point, and Rich Harwood's actually producing a paper on this that we hope to have available soon. But this is a big one. So there's a vacuum in communities for organizations that are really willing to do the hard work of bringing sectors together to actually address problems in a comprehensive way. Again, our experience is that, and you look at some of the work that's been done around collective impact, which is pretty popular right now. We all know that collective impact is needed to drive more larger scale change in communities, but our experience, and one of the things that Rich is going to be talking about more, is the fact that if that work is not approached with a turned outward orientation, what happens is that you end up, and I'm oversimplifying, but essentially you end up with a number of institutions coming together using data and best practices to decide what's best for the community, and then going and doing that and measuring that, as opposed to using the community as a reference point. And data, and don't hear me wrong, data and best practices obviously matter. Expert knowledge matters, but our experience is that those efforts are going to be much more effective if the community voice is part of the discussion. And what we've seen is that, again, if you don't have that turn, you do your work. So, and it changes the decisions you make and how you bring people into that work in a way that's meaningful. So much of what we're talking about is actually foundational to that concept.
Okay.
So let me touch on a couple other things, and then we'll move on. So, you know, our work also, and some of our key concepts are also focused on individuals as leaders in communities. And so we talk a lot about being a public innovator. Obviously, public innovation is in our name. So much of our work is about building the personal competencies of people. So it's about building organizational competency, and I've mentioned this before, but it's about individual competency as well. And so for us, public innovators are people who are committed to making change in communities from the seat that they're in, but they're also equipped with the right orientation so that they're engaging in their work in a way that uses the community as the key reference point. And so that's a big part of our work. And then we do talk a lot about the way that leaders actually make leadership decisions in their work. And so we spend a lot of time working with CEOs and board members and others. We work with leaders to get clear on the values that they bring to the work, and then we have tools, for example, a personal covenant tool that we use that helps people sort of clearly articulate what their values are, and then how do they execute their work in a way that uses the community as a reference point, but also stays true to the values that they bring to the work. And so those are some of the ways that we work with individuals.
So Mike, under this individual leadership column, is this where the 3 A's of public life really fit in? You know, authority, authenticity, and accountability as applied to your own leadership?
They do. They're critical here. I'd also say that they're critical. They're critical in the organization as well. So they actually apply at both levels. So right. Marla's mentioning one of our foundational concepts, the 3 A's of public life, and so we also have tools and frameworks on what it means to hold genuine authority, authenticity, and accountability in the community, which is very, in the way we build those out, is very different than the notions that a lot of people bring to those concepts. So a lot of times when we think of people that have authority, we think of people who are in official positions of power, who have certain titles and so forth, but the kind of authority we're talking about doesn't necessarily come from the position that you hold. It comes from the way that you conduct yourself in your work. And so we have tools that help you assess yourself and your organization relative to the 3 A's. And part of the change that we try to drive is how you bring those values into your organization and into the individual way that you do your work.
Well, Mike's covered a lot of ground so far, and if you have a question, please go ahead and type it in the chat box to the right of your screen. And We want to get as many of your comments and queries as possible before the webinar ends in about 25 minutes. But go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I'm seeing some of these questions in here, and I'll come back to a few of them in a minute.
Great.
You are getting some questions in, so please just keep the questions coming in, and I'll take a break here in just a minute and try to go through some of these. So just quickly, so I have sort of covered some of our key concepts, and there's a couple of things in here that I just want to touch on briefly, but I wanted you to have them as background. So, I mentioned that that what we're really trying to do is help people become turned outward. So really to develop a different way of approaching their work, so that the community becomes the reference point for the work that we do. And I mentioned that a key part of that is actually engaging the community in a fundamentally different way. And so that's where we start. So we start with listening in the community in a different way, and then we have tools and frameworks to help you apply that to the strategies you pursue, how you develop your organization internally, and how you develop yourself as an individual leader. We also know that that people go through our work in different stages, and the deeper you go with our work as an individual and as an organization, the more likely you are to actually be able to sustain the change and the greater results that you're going to get. And so, if we want to go back to the example we used of the exercise example, it's sort of the difference between the person who works the elliptical every day, which, just to be honest, that's me. I'm the elliptical person, versus the person who becomes the marathon runner. So we've sort of identified 3 stages to our work, and you can see yourself in this. I won't spend a lot of time on these, but essentially what we find is that organizations, some organizations and people come to us, and all they're really interested in is the first part of our practice, which is really about the turning outward piece. So they're really interested in getting tools to help them engage their communities in a deeper way. And like we said before, that's the beginning of our work. And if that's all you do, and go out, if you go out and listen to the community in a deeper way, and you bring that knowledge back, and you as an organization build better connections with people, and start to think about how that knowledge can help shape and inform your work, there's value in that. And so some people come into our work and that's all they do, and they become really, really good at that. I know some organizations that we've worked with that have become fantastic in the practice of listening to communities, building public knowledge, and generating more interest and public will for change. The leap that we really want organizations to make and people to make, and what we try to do with people, is actually help them leap from building that public knowledge and generating interest in public will, but to actually using that knowledge to generate shared work, shared strategies that actually fit the context of the community. And so that's where those tools that I mentioned before, those frameworks like community rhythms and public capital in the sweet spot, they become so important, because where the rubber meets the road a lot of times is not just in the engagement of the community, but then actually using that to fundamentally change the way that you actually do your work and the strategies you're actually pursuing. So if organizations can get there, that's fantastic, because then it's actually having an impact on the community work they're doing. Ultimately, where we want organizations to get is what we call stage 3, which is about embedding and sustaining the change. And when organizations and people are at that stage, what we tend to see is that they're actually, I think of it as institutionalizing this change. So they actually start to change the way their organization looks internally. They start to build different performance reviews, so that they start to value being turned outward in the work. How engaging people building strategies that reflect the community becomes not something that they're just doing around an isolated topic, but it becomes the way they do all their work. And so it really becomes a way of working for the whole organization. And so that's where we really want organizations and people to go. And so let me, this actually reflects, the next slide reflects one of the questions. Again, we're not going to go, I really wanted you all to have this as a resource, but if you'll look at the bottom row on this slide, so this breaks down our 3 stages. One person was asking about the behaviors of turning outward. I just want to sort of hit on those a little bit. So again, and I mentioned these a little bit before, but typically what we see early in people applying this work is that you'll have an organization and there'll be a small team in the organization that's out there engaging the community and building public knowledge. They're getting a better understanding of how people think about the issues, and they're building more credibility. So again, I know lots of organizations that this is as far as they went, but there's value in that because they're actually bringing something to the table that's more than just what they brought before. They actually have community knowledge, and a lot of organizations don't have that in an authentic way. What we tend to see at stage 2 is that the approach starts to be adopted beyond just a team working on a small project, and we start to see strategies being developed that are actually connected to what they've learned in communities. And so they're looking at things like they're going back to their strategies they already have, and they're saying, you know, we need to change this strategy because we learned that we're in this stage of community life and not this other stage, and our strategy's not calibrated. Or we thought we were on the right track, but what we're hearing people really value in the community is X, Y, and Z, and we're on A, B, and C. And so they start to make those changes. They also start to get clearer about what their role is in helping to drive that change in community. And at the 3rd stage, again, what we see is that it becomes an organizational norm for how they actually do this work. And so you might start to see, as I mentioned before, organizations that are building turning outward into their performance evaluations. So they're not just rewarding getting work done, but they're actually rewarding getting work done in a way that reflects the community. And we also see that they're actually starting to bring in more resources to the work. So not just human resources, but actually financial resources too. So again, we know that money matters, but our experience is that if you actually can turn outward and focus externally and start to use the community as a reference point, your work is going to have more impact, and the resources will flow. And you can also use this approach to actually engage donors too. So I don't have to tell you all, but you'd be surprised that the organizations we've worked with that tend to look at donors as just a checkbook instead of a human being that actually lives in a community and has value to add to the conversation. And when they make that shift, lo and behold, people want to give your organization more money. So let me, so again, I wanted you to have this as a reference point. I'm looking through some of the questions. There was a question about, there was a question I took about the behaviors of people that are turned outward. Some people have asked if the concepts are only USA centric. No, I actually think so. That's an interesting question. We found that many of our concepts are universal. Some of the examples and that we use are U.S. centric. So obviously they don't always apply. Some of the problems that, for example, some of the problems that I teed up on this this webinar wouldn't apply everywhere outside the U.S. But some of the much of the foundational work that we do has applicability outside the U.S. Not in every region of the world, but particularly we've seen interest in our work in Africa, in places in Africa, for example. There's a lot of interest in uptake of some of our work in places in Latin America. there's been other places that have adopted pieces of it. We're doing a lot of work in Canada, but the context is not too terribly different from what we deal with here. So, but there are places where the work does apply. There was another question about, are we working with funders to educate people around turning outward? We are, and we want to do more. And we also are interested in working with companies around this too, and we've done some of that work, but we want to do a lot more. So clearly, this has huge implications for how you invest resources and how you partner with communities. And so just as an example, we will be putting out an article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy around how funders need to think about working differently with communities that have faced both chronic and acute crises. And how turning outward and having a turned outward sensibility will change the way you think about how you invest those resources. And so we are doing some of that work, and we need to do more of it. And let me just take you through a couple of examples. I'm also looking through the questions here because I think some of the examples actually speak to at least some of the questions that I'm seeing here. So and just piggybacking off of the question about investments and funders. So we have done a lot of work with United Ways, and coming from the United Way world, I will tell you that one of the things that United Ways want to happen is that they don't want to just be seen as a funder, but they raise $5 billion a year around the world in the U.S. and in 40 countries. And so fundraising in giving out money is a big part of what they do. They invest in communities. But one of the shifts they're trying to make is actually to move from being just an organization that raises money and gives it out to direct services, but to an organization that you would think of as a backbone organization or a boundary-spanning organization, going back to what we talked about earlier, but an organization that actually brings sectors together to look at the root causes of problems and then builds collaborative action with partners and then invest their resources strategically. And some of that money may go into programs and services, but much of it may also go into addressing systemic issues, policy change or systems change and so forth. So they're trying to make this big shift. And Harwood worked with mobilization groups. That's what they called them at United Way Worldwide. So groups of United Ways that came together to learn how to mobilize their communities. And we worked with a number of those groups. And we actually helped shift the way that they do their transformational work. And so, like a lot of organizations, they were approaching transformation as we just need to get our internal house in order. So if we want to change our business model, then we need to change the way our marketing and our resource development and our allocations people and all the people in our organization work together. And if we do that and change the way we invest our resources, we'll be a community impact organization. Well, I don't have to tell you this, but lo and behold, they were doing that, and they were rearranging the deck chairs, and they were still an organization that was internally focused on its processes. They were just bucketing the way they allocated their money in a different way. So we started working with United Ways and said, okay, you have to focus externally to change internally. You have to build the sensibilities of turning outward. You have to be a turned outward organization in the way you do your work. And if you do that, you're going to be able to make the internal changes in a way that's actually going to be sustained. And you'll actually be the organization that you want to be and have the relationship with the community that you want to have. And so we worked with a number of United Ways over several years, and we're still working with United Ways. And what we found is that not in every case, because there's always hiccups along the way with a lot of the organizations that we worked with, a lot of the United Ways, building the turning outward sensibility, engaging the community, and doing this work actually accelerated their transformation. It deepened their connection to communities. We have, as an example, there was a United Way that the only time they were ever called to the education table was when somebody wanted their program money. After going through this work and shifting the way, actually practicing a different behavior in the community, and then starting to change the way they worked internally as a result, becoming more turning outward, the superintendent left the school system, and they were asked to actually lead the superintendent search. There's another example where they're getting called to come in and help craft high school graduation strategies, which again before the education groups would have gone off and built their strategies, and then they would have called United Way and said, write us a check for our programs. So, so they have a different relationship because they're able to bring something to the table that's more than just money. They're able to actually steward the public voice, and that's really important. So,
well, Mike, we've got less than 10 minutes. So, what do you think are the key points here? I want to make sure we get to those and to some of the key questions as well. I mean, what outstanding concepts haven't we touched on?
Sure. So I think we've hit on most of them. I wanted to make sure that that you had a couple of examples. I mentioned the mobilization groups. We can send you some more information. We did similar work with public broadcasting, and they that was another set of organizations that when the economy collapsed, and even before that, they're looking and saying, how are we relevant? How can we continue to be relevant to communities in, you know, as the world changes? And we worked with those organizations, and just by connecting with their communities in a different way, there were a number of them that actually, at a time when donations were ending for a lot of public broadcasters, they saw upticks in their giving. We've done engagement around communities and schools, and we've even worked with newsrooms to change the way they connect with the community. So I wanted to make sure you had a few examples of that. This is just a resource. I wanted to give you all this resource on the different products and services that we provide. So we do, you know, I mentioned that we teach and coach people to turn outward. We package that in a number of different ways. There's learning events and trainings, and then there's ongoing work we do with organizations. And so you'll have this. I didn't want to go over this in detail, but I wanted to make sure you had this. What are sort of some key takeaways? So I would say I've tried to hit on some of the questions, and I'll go through as we're talking and see if I can pick up on a few more. The big thing is that, you know, if I could sort of summarize it, it's that the act of turning outward, the act of engaging and connecting to the community, of listening to the community, of engaging the community in a deeper way, is critical to driving change in your organization and how you approach your community work. Because you know, our experience is that if you're not, it's very hard to change if you're not behaving in the community in a fundamentally different way. But that act in and of itself is not going to create the change that you really want to see in your organization and in your community. And so it's about turning outward, but it's also about leveraging, and this is why we bring other tools and resources to the table. It's actually about being turned outward in the way that you do your work. You know, as Rich Harwood says, using the community as opposed to the conference room as your reference point for how you make your decisions. And so if there was one takeaway, I think that it would be that. And I did want to hit on a couple of other things. So I hope that this was useful for you, and that you got some some insights. We definitely want to stay connected with you all. So I think this is really the work that you all are doing is really important. The communities at large are being left out of a lot of public decision making, and we've got to change that. And you know, I've been connected with Sandy and NCDD for a number of years, both at United Way and at Harwood, and then we want to be even more connected because I think that what you all are doing is so important. we hope that you all, will read Rich's blog and you'll stay connected. We have a newsletter. Every organization has a newsletter, right? So we have one too. But what we're trying to do is actually put tools and resources in the newsletter that actually can help you in your work. So it's not going to be just we're shifting some of our communication. So it's not just about things we're doing, although we'll share that with you. But we want to give you things that can actually help you apply some of what we talked about today. We also have some tools, and again, we're going to send you all this, but we have a few simple tools that you all can use with your organization around some of our foundational concepts. They're called Harwood in a half hour because you can use them with your staff and with people in a half hour. So you're free to download those and use those in your work.
And Mike, I think a point that Rich makes is that these tools are adaptable, and that's why he's made them freely available to everybody, just so that people can use what makes sense for them. You don't have to adopt them in toto, right?
That's absolutely right. I think that's a really good point. All of our work is really designed that way. So this work is about deepening the way you're going about your community work, and so most of our tools are designed so that you can pick them up in the middle of what you're doing without sort of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, which never really works for people.
Well, before we let you get away, Mike, I did want to talk a little bit about this Reclaiming Main Street campaign, because I said at the beginning that in order to really understand where the public is, we need maybe a deeper sense of their attitudes and what they're thinking about public life at this point. So can you just kind of go back to that 50,000-foot vantage point and help us put some things in perspective?
Sure. There's actually I want to make 2 points before we close out, and that's one of them. So let me hit the easier point first, and then I'll round out with that because I do think that's really important. The first one I wanted to make is that, so if you all want to go deeper with this work, we have what we call the Public Innovators Lab that's coming up December 10th through 12th. We do a national lab every year. This is all of those concepts that I gave you as that resource. We go through those over 2.5 days, and that's really the beginning of getting on the road to actually applying the practice, the Harwood concepts being turned outward. So that's the easiest way to get plugged in if you're one of those people that wants to go deeper in our work. If you do that, this is the address on the page to sign up. We co-host it with United Way worldwide, but it's not a United Way Innovators Lab. It's for anyone who wants to do it. We just co-host it at their facility. You go and sign up, and you put the name of your organization, -NCDD, and we'll flag it, and you'll get a 15% rebate on that. So
that's great. Thank you.
Flag that for you. So that's one concrete way you can get plugged in. The other one is what Marla was referring to. So we are on a campaign right now called the Reclaiming Main Street campaign because we think that public life and politics just isn't working for people, and we need to do something about that. All of our work is about that. I sort of prefaced that at the beginning of this conversation. So we need organizations and people working in communities in a fundamentally a different way. And what we found is that there's a lot of people out there that aren't engaged because they just they don't think that anything they say or do is going to matter because the institutions aren't listening to them, and we all see what's happening in politics. I mean, there are certainly better examples locally, but at the national level, it's quite a mess. And so we're going out around the country. We started in D.C. We're going to Oakland, California. We're going to be in Sarasota. We're looking at going to Colorado Springs, to Atlanta. There are a number of other communities on our list and we're open to going anywhere that people are interested in having us. And so Rich is going to be out there speaking around the country about the fact that we've got to get politics and public life back on track. And even though there are things going wrong, there are actually some concrete things that we can do as individuals, as organizations. There are things that we can actually do together to actually start making progress. progress. And so he's going to be talking about those. I can send you all some more information on that. If any of you are interested in bringing us to your community or just plugging into one of our campaign tour stops, we'd love to have you at one of our events. But if you want to bring us out or interested in just talking to us about how we can work together, you have Andrew's contact information on this page, and we'll send you some information on this as well. And then if you're just interested in working with us, if you work in an organization and you're interested in figuring out how you can build the organization's capacity to be turned outward, we work with a lot of organizations individually. We work with big networks of organizations too, but we also work with a lot of individual organizations. So you can contact me for that, and I'm happy to talk with you about different ways that we do that.
And Mike, how can everybody get all of the slides and the materials that you've shown us here today?
We have the list of everyone who signed up, and I'm sure Sandy will be sending them out across the various listservs and ways that she gets stuff out. But at a minimum, we'll pull all this stuff together. We made a list of all the things I told you I would send you, and we'll email it to all of you. Okay.
Any final thoughts? Mike?
I have none. I'm looking through the questions. I
okay.
know I missed some of these. I hope that I hit most of them. If there's a burning question any of you have that I just missed in the chat box, just drop me an email and I'll get back to you.
Well, Mike, thanks so much. It's been a really rich hour full of a lot of content, and of course, you know, I think we're all hoping that we can take what we can use out of what you've said and connect in new and exciting ways, and we sure appreciate your joining us here today.
Well, I just really appreciate the chance to talk with you all about what we're up to, and I'm glad we're part of this network, and look forward to learning from you all as we all move forward together.
Great. Well, we've been talking with Mike Wood this hour. He heads up the Harwood Institute's Business Development and Strategic Partnerships area. So, Mike, we'll stay in touch, and thanks again.
All right. Thank you.